My experience with breast cancer it's been a long journey for me. I'm 25 now. I was first diagnosed at 18. So I graduated high school a few months before I was in college. So I had to drop out of college to take treatments. And I found it through self checks. So my friend's mom was actually diagnosed with breast cancer, and she said make sure you either get a mammogram, or she was telling people make sure you get a mammogram or do self checks. And at that age, you really don't do mammograms. I mean, when you think about people with breast cancer, you think of people in an older age. So I was in the shower and I did a self check. And in the top of my right breast, I felt a, at the time, it was kind of medium lump. So maybe the size of, um, like a large grape, maybe. Um, and so I was like, well, this is weird, but of course, I mean, no one my age gets breast cancer, or it's not really heard of. So I kind of blew it off. And a few days, actually, like a week or two later, I actually felt it again, and it increased in size to maybe the size of a apricot, like maybe a small apricot. And I could physically see it. So it was in a pinkish tone, and it was starting to become painful. So I told my mom, and my mom worries a lot, so she kind of freaked out. So she took me to the doctor, and they did a ultrasound, and through ultrasound they told me that I would have to go and get a mammogram. So I went to go get a mammogram, and they told me that since I was so young that my doctor would have to call in and say that I actually legit needed it, um, because I was 18 at that time. So he did that, and he told him that I actually really did need it. And about 4 days later, I came back to my doctor, and he told me that I had stage 3 breast cancer. It was about 6 centimeters. And so that's how I was stage 3, because it was pretty large at that time. Um, and I do want you to know that young women can and do get breast cancer. I was 18, and there's people who've been younger than that to get breast cancer. I mean, cancer does not discriminate at all. Color, age, anything, income, it does not matter. So through that, they set me up with a team of doctors. So I did, since it was so close to the skin and they wanted to save my skin for reconstruction, um, I did chemotherapy first. So I did 6 months of chemotherapy. I took Adriamycin and Taxol, and I did pretty well with it. It decreased a lot, maybe to the size of a small grape. And after that, it was small enough to save the skin. So they did a right mastectomy, and they put a tissue expander in. And after they put the tissue expander in, I did 6 weeks of radiation. And the radiation kind of burnt me some. So I had to put lotion on it and like some burn ointment. 3 days after I got back home from radiation, because I had to go to a different city because I lived in a small town. They didn't offer radiation like that and where I lived. So I stayed at this place called a Hope Lodge, and it was free for me to stay there because of my doctor recommending it to me. Um, so I stayed there, but when I came home after I finished radiation, I felt horribly sick, and the only way to really describe it is I felt like a zombie. Like I slept constantly, I never ate, and I just felt awful. And I called my doctor, and he told me to go to the ER. and my tissue expander got infected from radiation. So that's another thing. You have to tell your doctor everything that goes on, because you never know what's going on with your body. So they had to do an emergency removal at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And so after that, I didn't have anything on the right side. They took it out. So all the skin that they stretched out, they had to sew back up because they couldn't put another one in because that stuff was still infected in there. They had to get rid of it. And at that time, I just had my left breast. And in between that time, my father lost his job, and so my insurance went away. And so I applied for Medicaid, and it took about a year to get approved for Medicaid. But they approved my reconstruction, and I had reconstruction. At that time, they did a left mastectomy, and then they cut me from hip to hip. They took the fat and muscle from my stomach and made me new breasts out of it. They used the extra skin from my stomach to kind of do like a patch job on the right side, just because there was not enough skin there, because they had to get rid of the tissue expander. And then after that, they had to do some touch-ups just to make sure that they were both even. And then when I was in between that time, I moved, I got married, and bought a house. And then when I was about 22, I was re-diagnosed. So I had a reoccurrence. And it actually came up in my sternum. So kind of where a necklace pendant kind of lays. And they told me that it was the same cancer that I had before. They said it was estrogen receptive. It was the same exact cancer. And they told me that there was actually cancer cells hiding in between my ribs. And so when I stopped treatments, it started growing. So it never technically went away. So there was a large lump on my sternum area, and at that time it was in my lungs as well. So they put me on some medication. It's been a few years ago, but I was taking 22 pills a day. And that was a lot for my body to take. And the lining of my stomach got infected because I was taking so much medicine, and I ended up getting a fatty liver because of it all as well. So they took me off that medication and put me on Ibrance and Letrozole. And I was on that for about 2 years, and it worked pretty well. I barely had any side effects with it. And I felt pretty good. It was decreasing the cancer until one day the cancer stopped. The chemo stopped working, and it actually spread to my liver as well. So they put me on a trial, and the trial drug was from Pfizer, and I took it for about 2 months, and they did scans, and they found out that the cancer reached to my bones at that point. The chemo didn't really do anything. So at that point, this has been maybe a year ago. So it was in my liver, lungs, and bones at that point. And then I've switched so many different chemos. Unfortunately, with stage 4, that's kind of what you have to do. You take chemos until it works, and then if it stops working, you kind of have to switch to something else until something starts working. And now I'm on the medication that I'm on now, and it's a infusion. I go every Monday, and I take Gemzar and Carbo, and I haven't took any scans yet, so I don't know what's all happening. But about 2 months ago, I was walking and I felt a pop in my hip, and I kind of blew it off and said it wasn't that big of a deal. 2 days later, I was in excruciating pain, and went to the ER, and they said that I fractured my hip. And so they went in and they put a medical concrete in that area to seal and secure it, and some pins. And then because I had cancer in my femur bone and in my right hip, they didn't want that to break as well. So they put a rod in the middle of my uh, bones and some pins on that side. And so I started off with in a wheelchair, and then I eventually went to a walker. And at this point, I'm doing physical therapy twice a week, just kind of trying to walk normally again. And I'm using a cane, so it's getting better. And I'm hoping that we can do scans soon to see how well this chemotherapy that I'm taking now is working.